Hello again, this is Ben Hitchcock Cross talking to you today for Deliberate Indifference, Wisconsin. I'm going to sort of go over what would be the next steps, what could be the next steps for Bethany Eskro and company. I'm going to pull a Dr. Grande on you here and say that I'm not going to talk about this case, I think for obvious reasons, but also because who knows what's going to happen tomorrow. This is more or less speculation here on what I might advise you if you were to come to me with a video along the lines of what Bethany Eskro came to me with. Now, keep in mind here that I am first and foremost an employment attorney. So I deal with people's jobs and getting their jobs back and their working conditions and improving those, either fighting back for some discrimination that's happened to them or try to intervene and solve problems for them in real time. So that's one of the things that I was doing there with, I would be doing in a case like that if you were coming to me. It would be unusual for you to come with me, to me, just with a video like that. But it's not to say it couldn't happen. So we would have a discussion in which I would take some basic facts about this, I'd give you some legal advice, and then we'd plan out a strategy here. The first thing that we would need to talk about is the insurance company and who really is the one who's able to pay for all this. The city is, especially a city of this size, is not ultimately going to have the means to pay for all the damage that they may have caused here. Certainly the chief really sort of, in this scenario, would have really risen the level of damage, that the city has caused. So only an insurance company is going to be able to afford to pay that. Mr. Hainsel, to the extent that he's employed, or the police chief rather, to the extent that he's still employed by the city can be liable for his actions. Not necessarily after that, but certainly while he's still employed there, because again, you wouldn't want to go after Mr. Hainsel or the police chief himself. You would want to go after the city and by extension their insurance company. So with that in mind, though, you still have to name the police chief. You'd still have to name all the bad actors, so that as in the lawsuit there, so that you can recover from them and then be indemnified, and it's a whole thing. Okay, so what really is that process? The first thing you have to know is with First Amendment, you're going to ultimately have to either file or threaten to file a lawsuit in federal court. Okay, what does that mean? That means that you're going to have an attorney. You can all do this yourselves, but you're ultimately going to have, I would investigate the facts, get them from you, independently investigate them, try to get confirmation from other sources, because I'm not going to sign my name as an attorney to something just because you say this is what happened. That's a mere allegation, really. I have to do some investigation, some reasonable investigation, to make sure that I believe that what you're telling me is true. So a good way to do that is to back that up with documentation. I'm going to want documentation anyway, like this video, for example, because ultimately we need to get to a jury, or we need to convince an insurance company to pay. So you're going to want to have this documentation. So we're going to talk about that up front. Now, the next thing that you need to keep in mind is a complaint, which is the document that you would file to start a lawsuit, really contains a few kinds of information. The first thing in there is going to be the parties. Who is it that you're suing? Okay? Mostly it's going to be the city, some school district, something like that. Sometimes, though, the individual people are bad actors, the superintendent, the mayor, the police chief, like that. So you would name those people, and there's a series of cases that sort of explain how you do that, and why you do that is the purpose of basically getting the 14th Amendment to apply to the city in this case. Okay? So then we have a section there called the facts. In federal court, big thing to keep in mind is you don't just waltz into federal court. like you can sort of in state court or certainly in workers' court here. You have to have a specific federal law or federal question or some reason that gives the federal court jurisdiction here. Well, the First Amendment constitutional issue is going to be just fine for that. So we can check that box pretty quickly. Okay, the next thing that has to happen is that you have to tell this story. Okay, so we talked about investigating the facts, but more than that, it's got to be put down on paper. Now, I'm doing one at the moment, and I can tell you that, you know, it might seem like it should take a couple of hours, but it's always going to take a lot more. And that's because it's the double checking of all the facts, but also you're trying to tell a story. And the way you tell a story is you start not just in chronological order, but everything builds. The next thing that comes up builds on the thing that came before it and is setting up the next thing coming after that. And that process there of building the story is, I think, is time consuming. Another thing a good story has is an overall, you know, arc or theme along those lines, which is, there's a lot of ways to say that, but basically, how can you tell this whole story in one sentence? Right? Something like here, you know, is chief is insulted and retaliates against employees for free speech. Simple. Okay? That story, I think the problem with that is it doesn't encapsulate everything that may be going on in a story like the one in Amory. I think what's also going on is, why is this police chief there? And I think that that may not necessarily be part of the claim if we're just focusing on this tape. Okay? But part of the story that I'm going to want to know as a reader, as a law clerk for the judge, as a jury, as the other side, people are going to want to know what the answer is to this question, is why in the heck is this police chief going off the deep end like he's going? Now, part of that story may be that, you know, a police chief in this scenario's wife has got images online, but that's not the whole story. Okay, that comes up, but another question is, why is this person here? Why is this chief here in the first place? Who put him there? And why is he in this position to cause all these problems? Because I think we've seen that the chief in this scenario was really absolutely unfit to do their job. And, you know, in this scenario, we would want to know and explain in the story of, you know, to the extent that we know, why this police chief was put in this position, why, and, you know, we don't want to use passive language, we want to say why the mayor chose this police chief. And then, because part of the issue why that's important among everything else to tell the story is, it leads up to the fact of why is the city ultimately responsible for what this police chief is doing, more even than just the fact that employs him and he's making these statements. Because in a situation like this, you've got repeated opportunities to self-correct, as they say, and in a situation like this one, where the city is ultimately doing everything it can not to correct the situation, maybe up and until the police chief or the mayor or the city administrator resign. So those would be things, that's why, also another reason why you're going to tell that story with, hey, we're starting here of why is this guy in there in the first place, and why aren't these people doing anything about this obvious problem that's causing all of these real harms to real people. And then that's, I think, what you always want to sort of focus in on and tell that story, because in any lawsuit, ultimately somebody has to be harmed. I mean, that's part of the problem about it. You can't even go, you don't have standing, as they say, unless you've had some injury, you know, either from violating your civil rights, getting terminated, you know, physically injured, automobile injury, some kind of physical, not physical in any sense, some kind of harm. needs to happen to you in order for you to have a cause of action. So the last thing I want to say with that, and I think it ties it all up, is every cause of action that we're talking about, what is that? We're going to get to counts in a second, but what does that mean? That means some way, a way to get the federal courts to tell somebody that they have to pay you money. Because that's what you want in the end, is either a settlement or a judgment from the court saying, you know, Mr. X has to pay Mr. Y or whatever such and such amount of money. Okay? That's ultimately why you go to court, is to get that, to get paid. That's all they can do in the civil court ultimately, is say this person has to pay this person or they don't. So you, in order to get a court to be able to be in a position where it can say, I order this person to pay this person, you have to file what's called a cognizable or a real claim. Okay? So in First Amendment, I'm going to go with one I think I can do in my sleep here. That's going to be easier, I think, that I can explain in my sleep. A discrimination claim on the basis of sex, for example, means that the person who's being discriminated against is female. Okay, that's, you check that first box, bam. That they have suffered an adverse employment action, they were terminated, for example, okay, by, you know, Corporation Y. Okay, and the reason that they were terminated is in whole or in part because that she's a female. Okay, so to get that part in there, you're going to want a sentence in your complaint like, the manager said, we don't like pregnant people, and we know you're just about to get pregnant, so you're fired. Okay, that would be a statement that would indicate that the reason you're getting fired in whole and part has to do with your sex. Okay, so in order to have a complaint that you can go and is actually cognizable, you need to contain those three elements. So you would need to have in your story, for example, going back to what we're talking about, the First Amendment elements in your story. So going back to the sex discrimination example, you would need to have a paragraph in there that says that the plaintiff is female or male or whatever, what have you. Okay? You would need a paragraph in there to say that they were terminated, and you need a paragraph in there to say that the reason that they were terminated is because they're female. Other than that, you don't need anything. But that's, generally speaking, not going to be good enough. You're going to need more to build the story. But those elements have to be in there, or you don't have a case. Okay? So whether you have a good case, a bad case, or something else, that's different, but the case gets dismissed if you don't have those elements in there. Now that brings me again to the final point here, which are these counts, which is that basically you're going to list the claim, sex discrimination, First Amendment violation, whatever it is. Then you're going to list out not so much the elements, right? You don't want to tell them, you want to show them. So you're going to say, here's the way, she's female, they terminated her because they didn't like that she was going to become pregnant. Bam, that's the count. Okay, and then you ask for relief, whatever it is that you can get in those claims. Okay, so for example, there are kind of uncapped punitive damages in First Amendment claims. There are capped punitive damages in employment claims. So, you know, you're obviously going to want to focus on one or the other or both, plead them in there. That's all a matter of strategy. But again, just in terms of telling the story here, again, you got to identify who it is that harmed you. You have to be able to tell the story about the harm. And then you have to identify the law that allows you to recover from them from harming you, and making sure that you've got all those elements, 1, 2, 3, whatever it is, right in the complaint. Okay? So that seems simple, but really it isn't. So, but let's say that it's all done, you've got everything there. The next thing that you need to do before you file that really is to go to the city, either send them a copy of it or tell them you're about to do it, and send them a letter saying we intend to sue you for X, Y, and Z federal reason, and that will trigger their insurance company. Then you can start negotiating if that's something they're interested in or not, or file, or whatever you want to do. Yeah, I mean, you can also just file if you want, and then you'll get contacted by the insurance company. That all is absolutely possible. But if you want to settle it, you're going to want to contact them first, I assume. Okay? So that would be what I would be thinking if somebody came to me with a video like the one that Eskro was thinking. So that would be, again, my next steps. Don't know if that's what they're going to do here in this case. I also want to explain to you that that is not legal advice. I want to tell you very clearly why it's not legal advice. Okay? Me going over the steps on how to file a complaint does not tell you one thing about if your facts are equal to being a complaint, meaning a cognizable legal issue that you've raised there. And that really is the biggest thing that you need, and you need somebody individually to work on. I really advise you to have an attorney. You certainly can do anything yourself in federal court or in any court. But generally speaking, it's going to be a lot easier for somebody who's done this before to at least assist you in getting those elements out there. So again, what I'm trying to accomplish here is to give everybody a sense of what would be the next steps, not what are the next steps, and certainly not what are your next steps. Because I don't know anything about the facts of your case, and I'm just hypothesizing here on what could be happening in a case like this if somebody were to bring me a video like the one that Eskro brought. Okay? So to stick with us, we'll keep you informed.